So thanks for making the trip. It's always great to see new people, particularly from the West Coast we haven't met before.
We haven't, and first time to Cornell Tech.
Really?
Been to Ithaca many times. Was there just a couple of weeks ago, but first time here. So happy to be here.
Have you already been recruited to come back?
I think that's in process.
So I'd like to just kind of start from the beginning. By the way, all of our speakers this year were also all Cornell alums. That doesn't always happen. I've had years when there's been 0 Cornell alums. I just want to get really good speakers. We were blessed this year to get 6 amazing speakers, all Cornell alums. And it seems to be getting a little bit easier, by the way. This is our 10th or 11th or 12th year with this conference. And it's just been an absolute blessing to get these fantastic alums to come back. So you grew up in the Bronx. Your parents immigrated from Haiti, I believe. And I just want to get the family journey and a little bit of the what was behind that. And how did you end up at Cornell? What did you study?
Sure. So, yes, first generation American, first gen to a U.S. university. A little bit of background about my family. So, parents grew up, lived in Haiti. Anyone who knows anything about Haiti, it's a country with a very interesting history. The first democratic nation in the Western Hemisphere, right? Predated the U.S. Revolution, with a revolution that happened with the Caribbean, really slaves that were brought from a variety of different places, fought against the French, won their revolution. But then the country has migrated between this democracy and this autocratic government throughout its history. And so now, imagine the 1930s, 1940s, early 1950s. On my mother's side of the family, my grandfather, a doctor by profession, and was effectively the Secretary of Health and Welfare for the democratic government that was in place late 40s, early 50s. On my father's side of the family, it was a military family. And my paternal grandfather was essentially the head of the Haitian military. And like any uprising that happens between democracy and dictatorship, typically the military plays a pretty important role. So while both sides of my family were pretty prominent in Haiti, but they really were from the opposite side of the tracks, so to speak. And my mother and father knew each other through the Haitian balls and all of this stuff, but their romance really was rekindled when they both left Haiti and essentially ended up here in New York City. There in Haiti, both of my parents had the equivalent of a college education, but with all of the strife happening in Haiti, they emigrated here not speaking English, and essentially had to take on fairly menial jobs for their education level. So my father, a mechanic by trade, maintenance mechanic, and his skill was he could literally, these big multi-billion-dollar pieces of machinery, when a part would break, there's no one to call to get the replacement part. He would make it, literally, for a range of different companies. My mother gravitated towards sales, was a very effective salesperson. So that was my upbringing growing up. Hardworking family. I learned a lot about my Haitian heritage. Me, myself personally, I spoke Parisian French until I was 4 years old, then had to learn English to go to school. Fortunately for me, I was smart, applied myself pretty hard at school, first in the Bronx, then out on Long Island. And by the time I was 15 years old, I was taking all of these advanced courses. And back in the 70s, here in New York State, in order to show proficiency in any subject, you had to take a standardized test. I did pretty well on these standardized tests. So I'm 15 years old and I'm being inundated with college brochures, right? Come to my school, Case Western University, Princeton, Cornell, Harvard, all of these schools. And I joke that by the time I actually went to Cornell, I had a closet full of this paraphernalia that I had to throw in the garbage. But the journey to get to Cornell, it was my personal journey. My family didn't know how to navigate that process because they grew up in a different process. My high school, my graduating class in high school was 700 kids. Then the juniors was another 700 kids. So there were 3 guidance counselors in my high school serving the needs of 1,400 kids. I had to navigate this on my own. Where to go to school, how to pay for it, what I wanted to study. And it was that journey that brought me to Cornell. Why Cornell? Cornell was my stretch school, right? So for all of folks who are...
And Princeton and Harvard were not the stretch schools?
I'll get there. I'll get there. It was my stretch school, and this was the day where there was no common application, so you had to work hard on every application. I did 3 applications. I had my safety school, Syracuse University. And I pause when I say that because one of my bosses in my career went to Syracuse. He was part of the communications program, and they have a fantastic communications program. But that was my safety school. At another school where I was being recruited for sports. I was an avid athlete. And then Cornell was my stretch school.
And which sports, or which sport?
Basketball and soccer, but I was being recruited for soccer.
Okay.
And Cornell was my stretch school because as a land-grant university and student from Long Island, my tuition was essentially half of the regular rate. And so as I thought about, so how would I put myself through Princeton or Harvard or Wharton School, I knew I wanted to have a business focus. There was no way I could pay for it.
And what school at Cornell did you end up at?
So I ended up in Cal's. Okay. I was in the Dyson school before it was named Dyson, but essentially undergraduate business major, focusing on business management and finance was my pathway. And I saw myself as a banker, international finance. Eventually I'd get my MBA. That's the pathway that I saw for myself as I entered Cornell. One other little side note. Part of the way that I paid for my education was that I was an ROTC, had an ROTC scholarship. Back in the day, ROTC scholarships, full tuition, room and board, stipend for books, back when you had to pay and buy books. And I knew that that's how I was going to pay for my education. Also back in that day, it was a 4-year scholarship, but the first 2 years had no commitment. So it gave me 2 years to figure out, did I really want to be in the military or not? And if I didn't, again, I still had to figure out how I was going to pay for this top-notch education. But I had to do it all on my own, and figuring out all of these nuances of how do I pay for it, how do I graduate, et cetera.
I have so many questions, actually, that are off our script, but let me ask. So did your parents speak English when they moved here?
No.
So
they did not speak English when they came here.
And they learned?
Learned here.
Prospered.
And prospered. But again, this is why, as college-educated folks, a mechanic and a salesperson is what they ended up doing, and putting myself and my brother through what was a lower middle class situation, but it didn't feel that way. We didn't know any different.
Right. So then after the 2 years, did you drop out of ROTC?
I dropped out of ROTC. Okay. Paid for my education through summer jobs, but also very importantly in my journey, I was a teaching assistant in the business management key class and for the finance key class. And I say that, that's important in my journey because as I left Cornell and took my first job at Procter & Gamble, the reason I got that job was through the reason I had the opportunity to interview for the job was through the relationship with these two professors.
It's incredible. So let's talk about P&G and your journey since then. So you left Cornell. Let's see, you're wearing your wingtips, not quite, but you're
no more wingtips. I gave up the wingtips.
Right, but you have your blue shirt and your blue sport coat. I'm guessing you probably maybe even wore a tie at P&G. So very buttoned up for 8 years. You learned a lot, I'm sure. You landed all sorts of roles after that in various industries, restaurant, media, and ultimately ended up with Nintendo. And I'm just curious, it seems like you're really looking to be the intrapreneur, and we haven't had much of that today, maybe a little bit with Heather. But it seems like you're really the entrepreneur trying to shake things up. What did you learn throughout that journey before Nintendo that enabled you to be the entrepreneur by the time you got to Nintendo?
Sure. I think it's fair to say throughout my life path, I've always been a bit of a disruptor, right? What do I mean by disruptor? What I mean is looking at opportunities, looking at situations, and looking to approach them differently to achieve success. So, first example of that with Procter & Gamble. So, P&G at the time would hire about 100 people a year, typically blue chip situations, blue chip universities, into their brand management program. Brand management is defined as a small team that would have full responsibility, product, P&L, long-term positioning for a brand within P&G. So this could be Charmin, it could be Pampers, it could be Jif peanut butter, it could be Crisco shortening, which was a product I worked on. Typically, these 100 graduates would be MBA candidates. In fact, out of the 100, anywhere between 99 and 95 of them would be MBA candidates. In 1983, when I graduated from Cornell, I was one of 5 undergrads that went into this program. So, very non-traditional, very disruptive. I'm 23 years old. I'm working alongside people who had gone off and gotten their MBA, had some job experience along with that, typically late 20s, early 30s. Plus, as a person working in this brand, I'm working with salespeople, I'm working with product development people, scientists, people who are substantially older than I am. And oh, by the way, not many brown faces in that organization. So I needed to learn very early on how to navigate that situation, how to build support, how to come up with breakthrough ideas and then drive them through into the marketplace at a very, very young age. And just one small little example. There's been a lot of talk about food and food technology, baking and cookies. I worked on a product, as I said, called Crisco shortening. And when it comes to baking, shortening actually is superior to butter. Why? Because it's pure fat.
Just don't tell Susie.
There's no liquid in there, so it doesn't burn. Because it's pure fat, the cakes are more fluffy. But there's one thing that every baker hates about using shortening, and that's the measuring and the cleanup. They hate it. It's greasy, my measuring cup is full of this stuff. And so the breakthrough idea was, well, why couldn't we have shortening packaged like sticks of butter? Easy to measure. And I remember we held a focus group with women aged anywhere from about 30 to 55. And typical focus group, you talk a little bit, they talk about their favorite recipes, what they enjoy about the baking experience for them personally, for their family. We talk about what they don't like about baking. Invariably, this issue about measuring shortening comes up. And then we would show them shortening in packaged like sticks of butter. You wouldn't believe the reaction, the euphoria that these, women would show. It'd be like, oh my gosh, breakthrough proposition. And you knew it was breakthrough because when the focus group is over and you're trying to collect the product, because it's test product, right? I mean, we would show it to 3 different focus groups in the same day. It's not meant for home consumption. And we'd be fighting with these ladies to get this product back. I mean, that's when you know you've got a breakthrough idea.
Did P&G launch that product?
Eventually. I'll share that story. It eventually launched, but it took so much work. I mean, it's a classic entrepreneurial challenge within a big company. Because in order to create this product, it's a completely different manufacturing line, the stability is different. There's so many challenges that need to be overcome at every single stage that it's so easy for people to say no. So I worked on this product at a level in the company called assistant brand manager. I get promoted. I go work in a completely different set of categories for 3 years. I then am brought back onto Crisco shortening.
It's still there.
It's still there. And it had not yet reached test market.
So without the butter sticks, it's still there.
It's still the butter product had been worked on and relegated for 3 years.
So I have to say, my old Jewish grandmother, who died actually back right when you graduated, but right when I started Cornell, used Crisco all the time. She was an amazing cook. I never saw a stick. It was always a tub. It was always a mess. So are you sure that product launched?
The product launched. Yeah, the product launched in the late '80s, early nationally, like in the early '90s.
So that was after she passed.
It took that long, and again, I share the story because whether you are an entrepreneur, your own business, whether you're an entrepreneur within a big business, it's about persuasion, persistence, continually making the business case, getting people to support your idea, enrolling others into the proposition to bring it to life. And those are core fundamental skills that you learn and then apply in moving big ideas forward.
Yep. So you've continued to move up, and we're still pre-Nintendo, but as you continue to move up in seniority and job function, what did you look for to make or what opportunities did you look for that you thought, oh, that would make me a better senior executive?
So, this is another core insight I would share. As you go through your own personal journey, you really need to figure out what excites you, what turns you on every single day, and then apply that passion. For me, it was pace. I needed pace. I found out, after about 6 years at P&G, right? A company that, if you grow your revenue 3-4% a year, you generate 1 to 2 points of cost savings, you now are delivering 5% bottom line growth, you're a hero. I was fortunate in some of my experiences.
Like a true tech company.
Yeah. I was fortunate in my experiences to work on businesses that I was able to grow within P&G, 10, 12, 15 points of top line. And I found that tremendously invigorating. But when I would be relegated to brands not growing that fast, I was incredibly frustrated. So I gravitated toward industries and business propositions that had pace. The restaurant industry has pace. It has the ability to make a change today, and I learn how it worked tomorrow when I count the receipts. And being able to do that at scale, I was at Pizza Hut for a period of time, and then the parent company that owns Panda Express for a period of time. And so the ability to make change aggressively, to see the results aggressively, is what motivated me. So it motivated me to get into the beer industry, specifically around the specialty beer market, the import beer market, growing aggressively. We could do fun and unique things. I did a private equity stint, all focused on pace, learning. And then the last thing I would highlight, I would make it a priority to be with people where I would learn personally, right? Learning, what I call learning from the best. And being in positions that through my activity, through the roles, I'd be adding additional skills. I'd be executing and driving growth and doing what I'm paid to do, and then I'd be learning some core skills along the way. And so when I would lose pace, or when I wasn't working with people that I respected as much, that was my formula to then look at other opportunities.
You're key to leave. So in 2003, when I think you joined Nintendo, you were the EVP of Sales and Marketing for Nintendo of America. Had you led a large sales organization prior to that?
I had not led the sales function per se. I had led clearly marketing organizations, and the space in between marketing and sales I had led, but a pure sales function I had not, which was part of the appeal in terms of picking on responsibility in a new area.
I mean, it's funny, like, to me, I think about it, wow, this guy has never led a sales team, and yet Nintendo is going to hire him to clearly lead the sales team, among other things. At a startup, that probably wouldn't happen, right? I mean, when we're hiring people into startups for the head of sales, we want somebody who's done sales in a lot of it. So that's just kind of interesting. Do you think they hired you thinking you might ascend to the presidency?
No, not at all. And again, I think we need to put this in perspective, right? Nintendo, you know it as a video game entertainment company. The company started in 1889, making what the Japanese called Hanafuda cards. These are beautifully decorated playing cards. That was the beginning of the company. That they then transitioned into making branded playing cards. The first company they partnered with was Disney, ironically. To then making physical toys, to then making small electronic toys, to eventually getting into the video game business. 2003, when I was being interviewed to join the company was in pretty rough shape. So at the time, the dominant market leader was Sony with their PlayStation brand. Small little company that's been mentioned here, Microsoft, had entered the video game business with their Xbox. Nintendo, depending on the marketplace, was sitting in either second or third place with their machine, GameCube. So not a great position to be in against two heavily funded competitors. Additionally, Nintendo had their handheld business, Game Boy, a money printing machine. Because they dominated that space, they were able to make profit both on the hardware and the software, which is unique in the gaming industry. Typically, you only make profit on the software. But oh, by the way, I joined the company in December. In May of 2003, Sony announced that they were entering the handheld market with a product they called the PlayStation Portable. All they did was announce the name of the platform and say they were going to be launching it the following year, and Nintendo took, I think, about a 15% haircut on their stock price. That's what I was entering into. And so clearly, the company was looking for someone who could drive the revenue generation for the company, who could do it not only at scale for the Americas, which is 50% of the global business, but they were also looking for someone who could partner with the developers in Japan and take some of these ideas and initiatives and make them globally. Yeah. That's what they wanted. In the end, they got a little bit more in terms of, yes, my ability to partner with the developers, but also to push, to challenge, and to help create new initiatives that really worked tremendously well in the marketplace.
So let's talk a little bit about that scaling. So when you joined, they're about $1.5 billion in revenue. You scaled it up to almost 10 billion in not that, a number of years, but it was relatively short. How did you do that? And then what happened? I understand there was a little bit of a hiccup after that.
Again, Nintendo of America, my responsibility, 1.5 billion in revenue. The key products that I helped launch really into the global marketplace, a little system called the Nintendo DS, 2-screen clamshell product, sold over 150 million units globally, 1 billion pieces of software. And again, software is where the money's made. And really what I was able to do was to help drive some of the core strategies around how we launch these products, some key insights around some of the software that we launched to help drive this level of growth. And just 2 little examples. First, up until the time of launching the Nintendo DS, all of the hardware had first been launched in Japan and then secondarily launched in the US and then eventually in Europe, which really didn't make a lot of sense because the volume potential for US, America is substantially bigger than Japan. But that's the way it had always been done. So the entrepreneur, disruptor is the one who's pointing this out, right? So significantly bigger business opportunity. Let's launch in the US first. We have this little selling holiday called Black Friday that kicks off our holiday sales period. Let's gear the launch globally around Black Friday in the Americas. Talk about pushing a stone uphill. But that's what we did. And for every substantive product launch since then, they've followed that same strategy. Launch in the Americas first, and then fast follow to the other markets. The other example I'll share, part of what we were looking to do with both the Nintendo DS and then the Wii that came later was to get more people playing video games. And it's hard to imagine this because today 3 billion people across the world play video games. Roughly, here in the United States, about 8 out of 10 people play video games, whether it's on your phone, on a dedicated console, PC. Back in the day of the Nintendo DS, it was more like 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 people were playing video games. And so we saw an opportunity to get more people, different people playing video games. A software that was developed in the Japanese market targeted toward older consumers was a piece of software called BrainAge. It was based on teaching from a Japanese neuroscientist that little exercises, little math exercises, little vocabulary exercises that were done every day would help your brain get exercise, and therefore it would help keep you sharp, was the core proposition. This product is launched in Japan, does exceptionally well in Japan, because in part they're able to leverage the notoriety of this neuroscientist. They come to me and say, we're going to launch this in the United States. We don't have that same benefit of notoriety of this neuroscientist. The core concept really needed some work. But the entrepreneur in me says, there's this number puzzle game called Sudoku that's really popular at the time. We should build Sudoku into Brain Age. And initially, the reaction is, oh, no, we can't do that, right? The neuroscientist, has never played Sudoku, doesn't know Sudoku. I'm getting all of this pushback. But I know that we have to do something different, because if all we do is launch the same exact game into the Western Hemisphere, it will fail. Long story short, I convinced, we demonstrated the Sudoku to the neuroscientist. Lo and behold, he's very excited about it. The developers are excited about it. We launched this in the Americas, huge success that helped drive our overall vision of expanding the gaming universe. So it was these types of things that I pushed on and drove, at scale to grow the business. So that's the Nintendo DS. Next product I'm involved in is a little piece of hardware called the Wii. Went on to sell 100 million units globally. And again, I'm pushing for differentiated approaches versus history that would succeed in the marketplace. And the example there, a software called Wii Sports. Fantastic piece of software, really defined the proposition. When I first saw it, the developers wanted to sell this as a standalone piece of software, which makes perfect business sense. Going to sell this for $50 globally, hugely profitable. Reggie said, no, let's not do that. Let's pack this software into the overall proposition, because it demonstrates what's so unique about the controller, what's so unique about this overall business proposition. Let's pack it in. Who plays video games here? Right? A lot of people play video games.
Even Greg.
So arguably, the world's best game developer, a man by the name of Shigeru Miyamoto, who works for Nintendo. So imagine, this fairly new employee at Nintendo having a discussion with Shigeru Miyamoto, trying to convince him that this software that his team has spent quite a bit of time developing, that we need to give it away for free by packing it into the hardware. That's what I did. That's how I pushed. That's how I challenged the organization. And interestingly, I won the argument for the Americas and for Europe. In Japan, they sold it separately. So it was a perfect A/B market. You could see what the difference was. And lo and behold, in Europe and in the Americas, the Wii really was this cultural phenomenon. Wii bowling being played in retirement homes, it's showing up in bars, Wii bowling competitions. It really was a key differentiator, that one decision, packing it in versus selling it standalone. So we were able to grow the global business to over 20 billion in revenue. My piece was 10 billion. But this is a category that's very innovation driven. And the successor to the Nintendo DS was a product called the Nintendo 3DS. A successful product on its own, but it sold half the amount of hardware versus the original DS. Roughly 75 million pieces versus 150 million pieces. The successor to the Wii was a product called the Wii U. The Wii sold 100 million devices. Wii U sold 13 million devices. So our revenue went from 20 to globally about 10.
And has it recovered?
It's recovered with a little product called the Nintendo Switch that I had a hand in launching. So, what's the moral of this story? Well, the moral of the story is, and again, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an intrapreneur, you really need to get the product right. Arguably for both of those devices, we didn't get the product quite right. But you have to deal with the hand that you're dealt in managing the business. And we had to make a number of tough decisions as the business scaled down and as we prepared ourselves to invest in the launch for the Nintendo Switch. And so, being flexible and aggressive and in the weeds, shoring up the business for roughly about 2 years while the Nintendo Switch was in development and before we were able to launch it, was it was a huge challenge and a huge piece of learning. But something when you're running a business and scaling a business that you have to learn how to do.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll have a couple from the audience. We're slightly behind schedule, but that's okay. So Reggie, you are obviously qualified to talk about race discrimination. How did it present itself to you? How did you deal with it? And what would you share with our audience along those lines?
So a couple things. First, we all have our differences, whether it's race-based, gender-based, whatever the case may be. And I learned early on, you have to accept that there's difference, right? I mentioned, for me joining Procter & Gamble, I was facing, I don't want to call it age discrimination, let me call it ageism, but it was the reverse, right? 23-year-old, pimple-faced kid, leading, seasoned executives, because that was my role, and I had to learn how to do that. And so my approach was understanding that it exists, it's real. And then how do I build support? How do I build empathy? How do I get alignment in what it is that I'm trying to do, despite my differences, whatever they may be? Plus, when you are faced with, outright aggressive discrimination, you have to deal with it. And so, I'm at Procter & Gamble. I'm a newly promoted brand manager. And again, brand manager, that title is key. That's a title you get after about 3.5 years with the company. There's a whittling out process. So out of the 100 that were hired in, maybe 25 to 30 get to that level. And you have responsibility for this piece of business. And so I'm a newly promoted brand manager at a sales conference. And I'm going to share this example, and I'm not trying to be prejudicial, but I'm going to share this example. I'm dealing with a sales guy 6'6", 6'7" years old from the Deep South, 6'6", 6'7" feet tall from the Deep South. His shtick was he would wear his shooting glasses, day and night, right? So I'm from the South, I'm a hunter, and I'm describing what it is that we're going to do with our brand, and he literally said, no, not going to do it. Don't believe it, not going to do it. And so you're faced with the situation, and it's like, what are you going to do? And my approach was, his name was John. I said, John, this is what we're going to do. And either you're going to get on board, or I'm going to fire you. I had no responsibility for this guy. He's in the sales function. And while I'm the brand manager, sales was managed as a shared resource. So I really couldn't fire him. But I had to make the point that this is unacceptable, right? You're either going to get on board with what it is that we're going to do, and this has been pre-sold through the management, or you're going to go do something else. But to react this way, really, and it was racially based, is just unacceptable, and we're not going to have it. Throughout the rest of my career, there's been discrimination much more subtly, but my approach has always been, let's understand we're all different, and let's understand, that difference really creates power in the organization. And I will work hard to generate support and alignment, but when tough calls need to be made, I'm going to make them.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. My name is Aime. As a first generation student, I found the message to be super inspiring. I'm just wondering, at your current point of view, for a first generation student, what would be the position of entrepreneurship in their future paths? How do they incorporate entrepreneurship into their pursuing of futures here in US? Thank you.
So I think the pathway of entrepreneurship, whether you're first gen, third gen, 10th gen, I actually think is the same. And what I mean by that is, first step in being an entrepreneur is, having that idea, that concept that you can't get out of the back of your head, right? It motivates you, it drives you. You need to have that core concept, and then you need to figure out how to bring it to life. And it's a series of steps. It's a series of steps of understanding what's the unmet need. It's figuring out your value creation strategy. It's figuring out your moat of how you're going to protect the business. It's figuring out how you're going to scale. These steps are the same regardless of your generation. Maybe inherently in your question, you get to a point where you need access to capital. And trying to get that capital can be a challenge, whether it's generationally based, whether it's gender-based. I do work with African-American founders, and helping Black and brown founders get access to capital is a challenge. And again, my approach is don't ignore problems or run away from problems. It is a challenge. And so helping to navigate through that is work to be done. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in helping, let's call it, some underserved entrepreneurs get access to capital. But the other steps are largely the same in trying to scale up your idea and bring it to the marketplace.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for sharing those amazing stories. Really enjoyed that. I wonder if you can give us just a quick crash course in how you convinced upper management in Japan, and also given the cultural differences and everything. And how do you go about that? Really
Sure.
Interesting.
So one shameless plug, right? So the stories I've told is in a book that I published last year that I was fortunate became a bestseller. So I have all of these stories in my book. It's called Disrupting the Game. But specifically to the, navigating Japan, my approach really started during the interview process. So again, imagine, Nintendo's in some challenging space. They like my thinking and my approach during the interview process. I get offered the job, and then I disrupt the interview process by saying, thank you, but I want to have a meeting with the global president. Now, mind you, the global president is not going to be my direct boss. He's going to be like a two-level boss. But I say I need to have a conversation with a gentleman's name was Satoru Iwata. I need to have a conversation with Mr. Iwata. And here's why. The Americas is 50% of the business. The trends that are happening in the business are largely emanating from the West. The ability for global Nintendo to be successful is really going to rest largely on my shoulders from an executional standpoint. I need to make sure that I can align from a strategy and vision standpoint with the senior most person in the organization. I can only imagine the conversations that happened in Kyoto when I made that request, right? Who is this guy? Doesn't even work for the company at this point in time. This is not going to be your boss. Why are you going to meet with him? Luckily, right, cooler heads prevailed and the conversation happened. But it set the tone. It set the tone that I wanted to have a collaborative relationship with the key executives in Japan. It's also set the tone that I was quite knowledgeable about the business, even though I hadn't been in the gaming industry before. And it's because I had been playing video games since the early 1990s. So I knew it as a consumer, and I could ask consumer-based questions. It also helped that as I made my first trip to Japan, a couple months later, that I was asking smart questions, making smart contributions. But it really was all based on a level of respect, a level of understanding the business, respecting the culture. I've worked for Chinese background type companies. I worked for Guinness, so understanding Irish culture, especially at the time the Celtic Tiger was taking off from an economic standpoint. So having the cultural sensitivity, the business background, the relationship building, and having the track record of success in that business is what enabled me to get credibility, to be able to have that difficult conversation with Shigeru Miyamoto.
Hi, my name is Eli. I'm a junior in Dyson. I actually read your book last summer, and I noticed that one thing you emphasized was your emphasis on relationships. What advice do you have for young students as they go about their careers and really try to develop and foster these relationships with those they look up to?
So again, and I'll reinforce this, my career trajectory is, it started with the relationships that I had with those professors, at Dyson that made the recommendation to P&G executives that this kid is someone you should interview because we think even without the MBA, he could do the job. And so, cultivating relationships, and it's not just with people superior to you in the organization, but across the organization. And recognize that these relationships need to be mutual or win-win, right? There needs to be something in it for that person that you're trying to generate knowledge or insight from in terms of how you could potentially help them as well. And especially that blossoms when you get into even more mentor-mentee types of relationships. So that's the first thing I would tell you. Second thing I would tell you is as you go off on your career, recognize you're not the smartest one in the room. And so ask questions. Ask provocative questions. That's how you're going to learn. And oftentimes that is how you build relationships by having those opportunities to be asking all these questions. The last thing I would tell you, and personally, this is something I learned later in my career, and my career would have been helped if I had learned it earlier, is that when you're struggling, ask for help, right? We're all proud. We all have these wonderful backgrounds. We all believe we're going to go, take over the world. But the fact of the matter is, there are times when we hit a patch where we're struggling. And it's critically important that you have the capability to ask for help and to do it authentically. And you'll be surprised that people will give you that help. And so those would be some of the things I would highlight.
Excellent. Reggie, thanks again. This is awesome.
Thank you.